"Your daughter needs a home, and my bed needs you," said the virgin cowboy. The wagon came into town just before sunset, dragging a wheel that had given up trying. It moved slow, like something wounded, leaving a crooked line in the dirt behind it. The woman who sat up front didn't look at anyone. Her face was pale beneath the dust. Her shoulders bent forward like she was trying to hold herself together with nothing but will. In her lap, wrapped in a faded quilt, was a little girl no older than 5. The child's face was flushed red with fever, her breath coming shallow and uneven. No one came out to help. That was the way of frontier towns in Montana. You didn't rush toward strangers. You watched first. You waited to see what they carried with them. Trouble, sickness, or just bad luck. And this woman, whoever she was, looked like she carried all 3. But someone was watching. From the open door of the livery stable, a cowboy stood with his hands resting loose at his sides. He was tall, lean in the way men get when they work hard and eat little. His shirt was faded brown, patched at the elbows. His hat sat low over his eyes, shadowing a face that hadn't smiled in so long he'd forgotten what it felt like. His name was Caleb. He was 26 years old, and he had never kissed a woman, never held one, never let himself want to. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the silence he grew up in, a cabin full of brothers who spoke in grunts, and a father who drank until words didn't matter anymore. Maybe it was the war he'd walked away from at 17, where he'd seen men cry for their mothers and bleed out in the mud. Maybe it was just easier to stay alone, easier to tend horses, mend saddles, and sleep on a cot in the back of the stable where no one asked him questions. But now, standing in the amber light of the dying day, Caleb felt something stir in his chest. Something old and buried, like a seed that had been waiting too long under dry soil. The wagon finally stopped in front of the general store. The woman climbed down slowly, her legs shaking. She lifted the little girl into her arms, cradling her like she weighed nothing, though Caleb could see the strain in her face. The child's head lolled against her mother's shoulder, her small hand hanging limp. The woman turned, scanning the street. Her eyes were dark and tired, and when they landed on the stable, on him, she hesitated. Then she started walking. Caleb didn't move. She came closer, her boots scraping softly against the dirt. Up close, he could see the lines around her eyes, the way her dress hung loose on her frame like she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, but she looked older. Grief did that to people. It carved years into their faces that time hadn't earned yet. "I need help," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "My wagon's broken. My daughter's sick. I don't have money, but I can work. I can cook, clean, and clothes, anything." Caleb looked down at the little girl. Her cheeks were bright with fever, her lips cracked and dry. Her small chest rose and fell too fast, like a bird caught in a net. "What's her name?" he asked. The woman blinked, surprised that he'd spoken at all. "Emma." "Emma," Caleb repeated softly. The name felt strange in his mouth, like something fragile he didn't know how to hold. He looked back at the woman. "What's yours?" "Clara." He nodded once, then stepped back into the stable. "Bring her inside." Clara hesitated, then followed him. The stable smelled like hay and leather and horse sweat, warm in a way that felt safe. Caleb led her to the back, where there was a small room with a cot, a table, and a stove. It wasn't much, but it was clean. He gestured to the cot. "Lay her down." Clara did, lowering Emma gently onto the thin mattress. The little girl stirred, her eyelids fluttering, but she didn't wake. Clara knelt beside her, brushing damp hair off her forehead. Her hands were trembling now, and Caleb realized she'd been holding herself together so tightly that letting go, even a little, was almost too much. He filled a tin cup with water from the barrel and brought it over. "She needs to drink." Clara took the cup and tilted it carefully against Emma's lips. The girl swallowed once, twice, then turned her head away. Clara set the cup down and pressed her hand over her mouth, her eyes squeezing shut. She didn't cry. She just breathed, slow and deep, like she was trying to keep herself from breaking apart. Caleb stood there, awkward and silent. He didn't know what to say. He'd spent most of his life around animals, horses, mules, cattle. They didn't need words. They needed patience, consistency, and a steady hand. People were different. People needed something he didn't know how to give. But then Emma opened her eyes. She looked up at him with the same dark, tired gaze as her mother. For a moment, she just stared, as if trying to decide whether he was real or a fever dream. Then, very softly, she whispered, "Are you a cowboy?" Caleb's throat tightened. He crouched down beside the cot, bringing himself level with her. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I am." "Do you have a horse?" "I got a few." Emma's lips twitched, almost a smile. "I like horses." "Me too." She closed her eyes again, her breathing evening out just a little. Clara looked at Caleb, and for the first time, something in her face softened. Not gratitude, not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. Maybe just relief that anyone, had stopped long enough to see her. "Thank you," she said. Caleb stood, uncomfortable with the weight of her words. He turned toward the door, then paused. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, I'll fix your wagon." "I told you I don't have money." "I know." He walked out before she could say anything else, stepping back into the cool evening air. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with pink and orange. The town was quiet now, windows glowing with lamplight, smoke rising from chimneys. Caleb stood there, feeling the ache in his chest grow deeper. He didn't understand it, didn't know why this woman and her daughter had gotten under his skin so fast. But they had. And now he couldn't stop thinking about the way Emma had looked at him. Like maybe he was something more than just a man who shoveled hay and kept to himself. Like maybe he could be someone worth knowing. And that thought scared him more than anything he'd ever faced. 3 days passed before Caleb said what he'd been thinking. Emma's fever broke on the second night. Clara had stayed awake through all of it, sitting beside the cot with a damp cloth, wiping her daughter's forehead every few minutes. Caleb had watched from the doorway, silent as always, bringing water when it was needed and wood for the stove when the room grew cold. He didn't say much. He never did. But Clara noticed the way he moved, careful, deliberate, like he was afraid of breaking something fragile. On the third morning, Emma sat up and asked for food. Clara's shoulders sagged with relief, so heavy it looked like it might knock her down. She fed her daughter cornmeal mush and weak tea, then held her close, pressing her lips to the top of her head. Caleb had turned away when he saw that, stepping outside to give them space. But the image stayed with him, the way Clara had closed her eyes, the way her hands had trembled even as she held on tight. By midday, the wagon was fixed. Caleb had worked on it in the early mornings, before the sun got too high, replacing the broken wheel and tightening the boards that had come loose. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold. When he told Clara it was ready, she looked at him with something he couldn't name. Not quite gratitude. Not quite sadness. Maybe both. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Caleb nodded, his hands hanging loose at his sides. He wanted to say something more, but the words tangled up in his throat. He'd never been good at talking. His whole life, silence had been easier, safer. But now, standing in the dusty yard of the livery stable with this woman and her daughter watching him, silence felt like a mistake. Clara picked up the small bundle of belongings she'd brought with her, a cloth sack, a quilt, a wooden box tied with string. Emma stood beside her, holding onto her mother's skirt with one small hand. The little girl looked better now, the color back in her cheeks, but she was still too thin, too quiet for a child her age. Clara's face was set, determined, but Caleb could see the fear underneath it. The kind of fear that came from not knowing where you were going or what you'd find when you got there. "Where will you go?" he asked. Clara hesitated. "East, maybe. There's a town 2 days from here. I heard they might need help at the boarding house." "You heard or you know?" She looked down. "I heard." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew what that meant. She was guessing, hoping, wagering her daughter's life on a rumor and a prayer. And if the boarding house didn't need help, or if they took one look at a widow with a sick child and turned her away, she'd be right back where she started, alone, broke, and running out of options. He didn't know why it bothered him so much. People moved through this town all the time. Drifters, ranchers, outlaws, families heading west with dreams bigger than their wagons. Most of them he never thought about twice. But Clara wasn't most people. And Emma had looked at him like he mattered. Like maybe he was someone worth trusting. "Stay," he said. Clara's head snapped up. "What?" Caleb took a breath, steadying himself. He'd been thinking about this for 2 days, turning it over in his mind like a stone he couldn't put down. He didn't know if it was the right thing to say. Didn't know if she'd even listen. But he had to try. "Stay here," he said again. "In town. With me." Clara stared at him, her eyes wide. "I don't understand." Caleb shifted his weight, uncomfortable under her gaze. "I got a cabin, about a mile north of here. It's small, but it's got a roof and a stove. Room enough for 3. "Why would you? Your daughter needs a home," he interrupted, the words coming out rougher than he meant. He paused, then forced himself to continue. "And my bed needs you." The silence that followed was so thick it felt like something solid. Clara's face went pale, then red, then pale again. Her hands tightened around the bundle in her arms, her knuckles white. Emma looked up at her mother, confused, sensing the tension but not understanding it. "You're asking me to," Clara's voice cracked. She stopped, swallowed hard, then tried again. "You're asking me to be your wife." "No," Caleb said quickly. "Not like that. Not the church kind. Just practical. You need a place. I got one. You need someone to help you keep your daughter safe and fed. I can do that. And he hesitated, the words sticking in his throat like thorns. "I'm tired of being alone." Clara's eyes searched his face, looking for something. A lie, maybe, or a trick. But Caleb didn't know how to lie. He'd never been good at it. Everything he felt showed on his face, plain as daylight. And what she saw there wasn't lust or cruelty or even pity. It was just loneliness. The same kind she carried. "I don't love you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know. I don't even know you." "I know that too." "Then why?" Caleb looked down at Emma. The little girl was watching him with those dark, serious eyes. He thought about the way she'd smiled when he told her he had horses. The way she'd asked if he was a cowboy, like maybe that meant something good. Something worth believing in. "Because she deserves better than a boarding house that might not want her," he said quietly. "And you deserve better than begging for scraps in a town that don't know your name." Clara's breath hitched. She looked away, blinking hard, and Caleb realized she was fighting tears. Not the kind that came from sadness, but the kind that came from being seen. From having someone look at you and understand exactly how tired you were of fighting. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Honesty," Caleb said. "And maybe company. Someone to talk to. Someone to cook with, sit with. I ain't asking for love. I ain't asking for anything you don't want to give. Just a chance. For both of us." Clara was quiet for a long time. She looked at her daughter, then at the wagon, then back at Caleb. He could see the war happening inside her, pride against survival, shame against hope. She'd been a wife before, a good one probably, and now here she was, standing in the dirt with a stranger who was offering her something that looked like charity but felt like something else. Something harder to name. Finally, she spoke. "If I say yes, you won't touch me. Not unless I say you can." "Agreed." "And if it don't work, if I can't do this, you'll let me leave." "You can leave whenever you want." She studied him for another moment, then nodded slowly. "All right." Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Relief, maybe. Or fear. He wasn't sure which. "All right," he repeated. They didn't shake hands. Didn't say anything more. Clara just picked up her bundle, took Emma's hand, and started walking north. Caleb fell into step beside them, leading the way toward the cabin he'd built with his own hands 5 years ago, the place he'd never imagined sharing with anyone. The sky above them was wide and pale, the wind carrying the smell of sage and dust. Emma walked between them, her small hand in her mother's, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb felt like he was walking toward something instead of away from it. But he also knew that whatever came next wouldn't be easy. Bargains never were. And the weight of what they'd agreed to, the unspoken promises, the quiet compromises, would follow them like a shadow for a long time to come. The cabin was smaller than Clara had imagined. One room mostly. A stone fireplace on the far wall, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed pushed into the corner. There was a wooden trunk at the foot of the bed and a shelf above it holding a tin cup, a Bible, and a single photograph in a cracked frame. Clara didn't ask who was in the picture. Caleb didn't offer to tell her. He'd built a second bed that first afternoon, narrow boards nailed together, a straw mattress on top. He set it near the window for Emma, where the morning light would come in soft and warm. Clara watched him work, his hands steady and sure, and she felt something catch in her throat. He didn't have to do that. He could have made them share. But he didn't. That night, Clara lay in Caleb's bed while he took the floor. She'd argued with him about it, said she could sleep on the ground just fine, but he'd shaken his head and walked out to the barn without another word. When she woke in the middle of the night, she saw him through the window, curled up on a pile of hay with his coat pulled over his shoulders. She didn't sleep well after that. The next morning, she told him she'd take the floor from now on. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll both use the bed," he said quietly, "just on opposite sides." And that was how it started. The days fell into a rhythm that felt strange at first, like wearing boots that didn't quite fit. Caleb woke before dawn to tend the horses and check the fences on the small plot of land he'd claimed years ago. Clara cooked breakfast, cornmeal, bacon when they had it, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Emma sat at the table with her rag doll, watching everything with those serious eyes. She didn't talk much, but she was always listening. After breakfast, Caleb would ride out to work. He wasn't a rancher, not really. He didn't have enough land or cattle for that. But he broke horses for the men in town, fixed saddles, and did odd jobs when they needed doing. It was enough to keep them fed, enough to keep the roof from leaking. While he was gone, Clara cleaned. She swept the floors, washed the dishes, aired out the quilts. She found his shirts in the trunk, most of them torn or missing buttons, and she mended them without asking. It gave her something to do, something that felt like paying her way. And when he came home that evening and saw the stack of folded shirts on the table, he didn't say anything. He just looked at her, and something in his face softened. "Thank you," he said. "It's nothing." "It's not." She didn't know what to say to that, so she turned back to the stove and stirred the pot of beans she'd been cooking. But she felt his eyes on her for a moment longer before he walked outside to wash up. By the end of the first week, Emma had stopped hiding behind her mother's skirt. She'd started following Caleb around when he worked in the yard, watching him chop wood or fix the gate. He didn't seem to mind. He'd glance at her every now and then, checking to make sure she wasn't too close to the axe or the horses. But he didn't tell her to leave. One afternoon, he saddled up his gentlest mare, an old bay with a white star on her forehead, and led her over to where Emma was sitting on the porch steps. "You want to learn to ride?" he asked. Emma looked up at him, her eyes wide. Then she looked at her mother. Clara hesitated. She didn't know if it was safe, didn't know if Emma was strong enough yet. But Caleb was watching her, waiting, and there was something in his expression that made her trust him. "All right," Clara said softly. Caleb lifted Emma onto the saddle, his hands careful and steady. The little girl gripped the horn with both hands, her face a mixture of fear and excitement. Caleb kept one hand on the reins and the other on her back, guiding the mare in slow circles around the yard. Emma didn't say anything at first, but then, as the horse moved beneath her, a smile broke across her face, small at first, then wider. She laughed. It was the first time Clara had heard that sound in months. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. She turned away so they wouldn't see, but Caleb noticed. He always noticed. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Clara sat at the table mending another shirt. Caleb was cleaning his rifle by the fire, the barrel gleaming in the low light. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came from two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Finally, Clara spoke. "You're good with her." Caleb glanced up. "She's easy to be good to. Most men wouldn't bother." "I ain't most men." Clara smiled faintly. "No, you're not." He looked back down at the rifle, running the cloth along the barrel. "You don't talk about him much." Clara's hand stilled. She knew who he meant. Her husband. The man who died 6 months ago in a logging accident. His body crushed beneath a tree he'd been trying to fell. She'd buried him in a town she didn't know with people who didn't care, and then she'd packed up what little they had and started moving. She hadn't stopped until the wagon broke down outside this town. "There's not much to say," she said quietly. "You loved him." "Yes." Caleb nodded slowly. "That's enough then." Clara looked at him, surprised. Most people wanted more than that. They wanted stories, details, proof of her grief. But Caleb didn't. He just accepted it, the same way he accepted everything else, quietly, without judgment. "What about you?" she asked. "You ever been married?" "No." "Ever been in love?" Caleb set the rifle aside and leaned back in his chair. He stared at the fire for a long time, the flames reflected in his eyes. "No," he said finally. "Never had the chance to be." Clara didn't press. She just went back to her mending, and he went back to the fire, and the silence settled over them again like a blanket. When they finally went to bed, they lay on opposite sides of the mattress, careful not to touch. The space between them felt like a canyon. Clara could hear him breathing in the dark, slow and steady, and she wondered if he could hear her too. She wondered if he was as aware of her as she was of him. The warmth of his body, the weight of him sinking into the mattress, the quiet presence that filled the room even when he wasn't moving. She wanted to say something, wanted to thank him or apologize or ask him why he'd done this. But the words wouldn't come. So she just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of his breath. And somewhere in the dark, she realized something that made her chest tighten with both fear and something else she couldn't name. She was starting to trust him. Not just with Emma's safety or their survival, but with the parts of herself she'd kept locked away since her husband died. The parts that still felt things. Still wanted things. It scared her more than anything had in a long time. Because she didn't know if Caleb felt it too. This quiet, growing thing between them that neither of them had asked for, but couldn't seem to stop. And she didn't know what would happen if it kept growing, or what it would cost them both if it did. The first snow came in late October, 3 months after Clara and Emma had arrived. It fell soft and silent through the night, blanketing the prairie in white. When Caleb woke before dawn, he looked out the window and saw the world transformed. The fence posts capped with snow, the barn roof heavy with it, the horses standing close together in the corral with frost on their manes. He pulled on his coat and boots and went outside to break the ice in the water trough. Inside, Clara was already awake. She'd learned his rhythms by now, the way he moved through the morning like clockwork. She had coffee brewing by the time he came back in, his cheeks red from the cold. He stamped the snow off his boots and hung his coat by the door, then sat at the table without a word. She poured him a cup and set it in front of him, their fingers brushing for just a moment. "It's early this year," she said quietly. Caleb nodded, wrapping his hands around the cup. "Winter don't wait for no one out here." Emma was still asleep in her bed by the window, her small body curled beneath the quilts. She'd grown in the months they'd been here, taller, stronger, her cheeks fuller. She laughed more now, too. Sometimes Caleb would come home from working and find her singing to the horses or playing in the dirt with sticks she'd turned into people. It made something in his chest ache every time he saw it. Something good, but almost too much to hold. Clara watched him as he drank his coffee. She'd gotten used to his silences, the way he could sit for an hour without saying a word. But she'd also learned to read him. The tension in his shoulders when he was worried, the softness in his eyes when he looked at Emma, the way his jaw tightened when he was trying not to feel something he didn't think he deserved to feel. She saw all of it, and she'd stopped pretending she didn't. The winter was hard. Not brutal, but steady. The snow kept falling, the wind kept blowing, and the cold crept into everything. Caleb worked longer hours to make sure they had enough firewood stacked against the side of the cabin. Clara cooked soups and stews that would last for days, stretching what little they had. Emma helped where she could, carrying small logs or stirring a pot while her mother kneaded bread. At night, they huddled close to the fire. Caleb would sit in his chair, carving small figures out of wood, horses mostly, but sometimes birds or wolves. He'd started making them for Emma, leaving them on her pillow without saying anything. She'd collect them like treasures, lining them up on the windowsill and naming each one. Clara would sit at the table, mending or knitting, her hands never still. Sometimes she'd glance over at him, watching the way the firelight played across his face, the way his hands moved with such care and precision. She'd wonder what he was thinking, if he was happy, if he regretted bringing them here. But she never asked, and he never said. One night, about a week into December, Emma woke up crying. It was the kind of cry that came from a bad dream, sharp and scared. Clara was out of bed before she even fully woke, crossing the room to gather her daughter into her arms. Emma clung to her, sobbing into her shoulder, her small body shaking. "Shoo," Clara whispered, rocking her gently. "It's all right. I'm here. You're safe." Caleb sat up in bed, his hair mussed, his shirt unbuttoned. He watched them for a moment, then got up and poured a cup of water from the bucket by the stove. He brought it over and set it on the floor beside Clara, then crouched down so he was level with Emma. "Hey," he said softly. "You all right, little one?" Emma pulled her face away from her mother's shoulder, her cheeks wet with tears. "I had a bad dream." "What about?" "I dreamed Mama left, and I couldn't find her." Clara's breath hitched. She held Emma tighter, pressing her lips to the top of her head. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "I promise." Caleb reached out, hesitating for just a moment, then gently touched Emma's hand. "Your mama's not going nowhere," he said. "And neither am I. We're staying right here. All of us." Emma looked at him with those big, serious eyes, then nodded slowly. She took the cup of water and drank, her breathing evening out. Caleb stayed there, crouched on the floor, until she'd finished. Then Clara carried her back to bed, tucking the quilts around her and sitting beside her until she fell asleep again. When Clara finally came back to the bed, Caleb was lying on his side, facing away from her. She slipped under the blankets, careful not to disturb him. But then, in the dark, she heard his voice. "You're a good mother." Clara froze. He'd never said anything like that before. Never spoken about her in that way. "Thank you," she whispered. There was a long silence. Then Caleb spoke again, his voice so quiet she almost didn't hear it. "I'm glad you stayed." Clara's throat tightened. She stared at the back of his head, at the way his hair curled against his neck, at the slow rise and fall of his shoulders as he breathed. She wanted to say something back, wanted to tell him that she was glad too, that this place, this strange, quiet life they'd built together, had become more than just survival. It had become something she didn't want to lose. But the words wouldn't come. So she just lay there, listening to him breathe, and let the silence say what she couldn't. 2 weeks later, on a night when the wind howled outside and the fire burned low, something changed. They'd put Emma to bed early. She'd been running around all day, playing in the snow, and had fallen asleep before supper was even finished. Clara and Caleb sat by the fire, the warmth of it barely enough to push back the cold creeping in through the cracks in the walls. Clara was knitting a scarf, small child-sized, made from scraps of wool she'd traded for in town. Caleb was sharpening his knife, the scrape of the stone against the blade a steady rhythm in the quiet. Then Clara set her knitting down. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it. She just reached across the space between them and placed her hand on his. Caleb went still, the knife and stone forgotten in his lap. He stared down at her hand, small, rough from work, covering his completely. Then he looked up at her, his eyes wide and uncertain, like he didn't know what she meant by it. Clara didn't pull away. She just held his hand, her thumb brushing gently across his knuckles. "I'm not scared anymore," she said softly. "Of what?" "Of this. Of you." of feeling something again. Caleb's breath caught. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. His grip was tentative at first, like he was afraid she might disappear. But when she squeezed back, something in him loosened. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice rough. "I don't know how to be what you need." "You already are." He shook his head. "I ain't good with words. I ain't romantic. I can't give you the kind of life you probably dreamed about when you were young." "I don't want that life," Clara said. "I just want this one. With you. With Emma. I want to wake up in this cabin and know we're safe. I want to sit by this fire and not feel alone anymore. That's all I want, Caleb. That's all I've ever wanted." He stared at her, and she saw the walls he'd built around himself start to crack. Saw the man beneath the silence, the one who'd spent his whole life believing he wasn't worth loving. The one who'd brought her here not because he wanted something from her, but because he couldn't stand the thought of her and Emma being out there alone. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Maybe not," Clara said, a faint smile touching her lips. "But you got me anyway." And then, slowly, carefully, she leaned toward him. Caleb met her halfway. Their foreheads touched, and they stayed like that for a long time, breathing each other in, their hands still clasped between them. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it was something more. A promise without words. A choice made not out of desperation, but out of something real and earned and true. When they finally pulled back, Clara rested her head on his shoulder. Caleb wrapped his arm around her, holding her close, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel alone. Outside, the wind kept howling. The snow kept falling. But inside that small cabin on the edge of nowhere, 3 people who'd been lost had finally found their way home. And in the quiet warmth of the fire, love, quiet, patient, and unshakable, took root and began to grow.